small business in determining that they thought they had this great legacy to be able to pass on to their beneficiaries, but it turns out that 46% of that value of that business is going to go to Revenue Canada. So that initial discussion around what the tax numbers are provides an opportunity to what are the options? How can we reduce the tax? One of the easiest ways is through insurance products that I know will be discussed in a few minutes. The other group of clients that I talk to quite frequently are personal tax clients. So what I'm looking at there is their situation where they have some significant RIF income for those who are seniors and are in pension mode, and also others who are giving annual contributions, and you're seeing evidence that they have a real interest in giving charitable gifts. So that opens the door again to saying, you know, have you ever thought about giving a more significant gift? Have you ever thought about what happens in your estate? And for those that have significant RIF income, again, doing a tax estimate for them, again, if they were hit with the Mack truck that day. And as over time, with relationships that are being built with our clients, we're more comfortable in asking them those questions. So I think that the important thing is the relationship that you have with the clients, and with the realization of what their personal circumstances are, that they're going to be sitting with a potentially significant tax bill that there are ways to avoid.
Just to add on to that, I guess the past 18 years being a financial advisor, my practice has transitioned from dealing mostly with concerned families to 75% of my practice now would be dealing with business owners and professionals. And when you're dealing with business owners and professionals and retirees, what tends to happen is they have different advisors in their court, and they have lawyers, they have accountants, they have financial planners. And it's so important that we all work together as a team. And it shouldn't be the financial planner and the client and not talking to anybody else. And it shouldn't work like that any other way. I know Jennifer and I have sat at the table before with clients. I've sat in meetings before with the accountants and the lawyers and us and the clients where we're gathering all the information and making sure that everybody is on the same page. Because there are a lot of questions, and we could sit here, you could ask us a question, we wouldn't have the answer to it, but somebody else here would have the answer to it. We don't have all the answers. What we want to do is plant the seeds. We want to make sure that when we take a look at where you are today, and we could do some projections. Some of this talk sometimes come from, you know, I don't know how I'm doing, I don't think I have enough money, I'm worried about outliving my money. And then we take a look and we do some projections and we do some safe calculations and we find out, you know what, you're going to have some money left over. And then some of the talks are, and I think about Rick over here in a meeting that we had way back in 1995 on King Street when we were meeting with a client. This is the first time I ever heard this from a client where they said, we have 3 grown children, they're all professionals, they all make a lot of money, they don't need our money. Well, and that's okay, that's really good. But we said, would you like to leave that to Revenue Canada? Or would you like to leave that to your kids? Or maybe would you like to help out somebody? Would you like to help out a charitable organization or a school or a hospital? Is there some other spot? So when we realize that a client is not going to live longer than their money, then we're able to help them out a little bit more. But it's working with the team of professionals together. It should never be an uncomfortable situation. You should never feel intimidated. You should always feel at the end of the meeting like, wow, I had some questions answered, I still have some more, and now I know that I can still ask some more and not feel like that I'm not at that caliber. And that's really important when you're dealing with a team of people, so that you know that everybody's on your side, and at the end, everybody's winning, because it's important. You take a look at Kingston, and we look at the Davies room here. Things happen because people get working and put things in motion. And if we have enough information, we're able to move things forward and make our community a better place.
I knew that would happen.
I agree with a lot that's been said by Jamie and Pat. Key thing throughout is you have to stay with your client, because most time you're with your client could be 20 years. But you will not know the opportunity or recognize the opportunity unless you've seen that client on a regular basis. I guess the biggest factor to answer Bill's question that I find is not the shock treatment, but more of, as Jamie said, do you want to leave Revenue Canada as your main beneficiary? And if you're dealing with registered assets, I guess the most common thing would be, say, a senior who is 70 and just lost their spouse who is 75. They had a huge amount in registered money, say $300,000-400,000. And you turn to him and politely say, unless you spend that all, you realize that almost half it's going to Revenue Canada, not to your kids. That opens up an opportunity as far as charitable giving and how to set your, obviously back as Mary Alice is it? Has said, a will is a key component of any financial plan. To me, that's my pet peeve. I bug everybody to death about it. But it's very key to, within the will, that you structure how you want your money to go. And one may be, since registered money stay outside the will, you should deal with that separately or have it go through the estate. So a key thing is recognize the opportunity, and 9 times out of 10, as Pat said, they'll tell you, and you have to be able to recognize the opportunity. As in case Pat said, the client says, I don't need my kids don't need the money. I have all this money, and they're almost asking you, what do I do with it? So the first thing you say is, will we give it to the tax man? And he will be a resounding no. Then the charitable opportunity comes up quite easily. The second thing that we've been fairly successful with in my practice is, I deal mostly with, Chris is a little younger than I am. I'm a little older. I'm not senior yet, but I'm getting very close. Is when a person is about to retire or retire, first thing he wants to know is, do I have enough income to get through retirement? So what we tend to do is do what we call an index, or you take the registered money or all their money and figure if he lives to 90, figure how much he wants to do, how much he's going to need to achieve the things that he wants to achieve. The top of your list is, what do you want to do with your money? Well, if he tells you he wants to fly to France, Switzerland, and all over the place, you know he's going to go through the money quicker. But if he's like 8 out of 10 around here, they're homebodies. They don't do a lot of traveling. So basically, you say to them, there's $600,000 sitting there. Most of that's going to be there when you pass away. So at that point, he's open for suggestions. You have to know the products. Insurance in my practice, plays a big factor in that you can make a very big gift through insurance as opposed to the $300-500 a year. And it's easily talked about. You can talk about how to set insurance policies up with the beneficiary being the charity, and basically, and if you make it the owner, you can actually claim the premiums and a tax deduction. And instead of it, when you pass away, the charity is very happy if they get a check for $100 grand. Otherwise, yeah, sure, you get to get $500 a year. That's nice, but I'll tell you, anybody who works for a charity out there will say that's where the bread and butter is to get these big organizations, small businesses, or whatever, to look at insurance, look at a way that you can achieve a bigger donation towards charity using that. So the key thing is always you have to work with is, the client wants to know, has he got enough money? So you index it to as if he lived to 90, and find out what money he's going to need, what sources it comes from, pensions or whatever. And then once you've done that, this is excess money, then you start pointing towards the charities.
But George, when an individual, I'm going to go back to the Schwab study because this has sort of been buzzing around yesterday in our heads. It's more about how do we engage the advisors to be getting into conversations with their clients, because in many cases, you're the ones who are managing the money. You're the ones, and it's less, it might be about product afterwards, but it's more about the values. Mm-hmm. It's the discovery process of where the person's at to sort of answer those unanswered questions in the back of their head. Because when we start to get into product, I think that's where things start to get a little fuzzy for individuals. And it's really sticking to the basis of having, you're working, I assume that all 5 of us are donors, right? We all give? Okay, so that's good. So we're preaching from the choir here. But how is it that we can start bridging this gap? Because it's that 78% that are annual donors that none of us have anything to do with. You people are writing the checks all the time, but that 78% now drops down to 9%, where they're actually planning on this. So this decay curve is really addressing the issue about if you're not giving and you're not going to be planning on giving, then the equation on the taxation side, that CRA is your secondary beneficiary after your heirs, is a reality. There's no other way around it. And the objective that we're trying to find is, how do we become more of an engaged group? And the objective of Leave a Legacy, as I see it, this is the way that we define what we do at Funding Matters. It's to educate, inform, and empower. Because if we can educate individuals and get the right advisors sitting around, then we can inform them better, give them the right pieces of information, and then empower them. Empower them to make those decisions that they need to take it to the next step. Because there's this huge gap that exists. And I've seen it over the years that I've been doing this. From the first conversation, months pass, years pass. Next thing, they're on life support and nothing's happening. And you know what? All the good intentions, and everyone's kind of scrambling, and that cousin that you never liked is the beneficiary. And it's that moment of, boy, I wish I did something. So the idea is how is it that you can become more engaged with the organizations and Leave a Legacy is a perfect example of it, but now to go and to sort of distill into the community, into community organizations, and how do organizations bring people like you in to be educating them about what their options are, and even on the client side, on the discovery side. Because that survey in itself, how'd you make your money? How do what are your values? What do you put your highest values on? At the end of the questionnaire, do you want to be recognized? How do you want to be recognized? All of that is part of a discussion that we should all be having on an ongoing basis, just to plant the seed, as you talked about, Patrick. So, can you help us out on that and jump into it?
Sure. Myself, the first obvious one you have to get around, if you 9 times out of 10, if you just ask somebody, would you like to be, have you ever thought about charitable giving? The answer is yes. So never just you got to open it up a little bit. The next question is, I'm afraid I'm going to run out of money. I can't really think about charity. So you got to answer that. In my own practice, at about age 60, I prepared a checklist, a state checklist, which I borrowed from Sandra Foster's book. You can't take it with you. And if you go through that, the first question on the page is, have you got a will? And you don't jump in right at that spot, but it goes down all throughout. Powers of attorneys goes down into charitable giving, into that type of thing. They complete the questionnaire, then you open up the discussion. You have to have some kind of tool, as I see over here, a tool where you can go through, and basically what that tool does is create the opportunity for you. But you need something as a trigger mechanism to get people talking about it. As I said, if you just ask them, it's a very short yes or no.
Thanks. I come at it a little bit differently, because when I'm doing wills and powers of attorney, people are already thinking about when they're gone. So the I might run out of money conversation is irrelevant, right? You're gone. You don't need the money anymore. It's what's going to happen when you're gone. So typically, I would say part of it is knowing who is likely to want to give. And at a certain level, maybe that should be all of us. But what drives people to be concerned about their estates? Well, for example, if you've got a disabled child, your number one concern is looking after that child. And you may be charitably inclined, but you probably want to put every penny you've got into looking after that child. But if, for example, you don't have children, then you may be very open to doing some charitable gifting. And I like to say to clients, this is the fun part. right? You know, everybody can do the, you know, all to the spouse and then to the kids equally stuff. And there's wrinkles on that, but the charitable giving is the fun stuff. That's where you get to be creative and look. And I say, what should the world look like when you're gone? What can you do to impact that? And you can do something about that. Clients will often say, well, you know, charity begins at home. And I like to say, yeah, but it doesn't end there. There's a whole world out there. And I think there's, I said we should all be charitably inclined. And to some extent that comes out of I'm going to say a good word for CRA here. Everybody's trashing CRA, so I'm going to say a good word for CRA. And there's a little bit of sort of political economic history that many of the social programs that were funded by government has begun to retreat from that, and the compensation for that was an increasing emphasis on the tax benefits of charitable giving. So it's kind of, you know, those two movements have paralleled each other. But what it means is that the things that we used to assume were looked after at some level by government aren't necessarily. And so if we want to see them looked after, that means we work with charities to make it happen. Anybody here interested in history? Yes? No? Yeah? I'm going to recommend, anybody interested in Shakespeare? Because I'm going to recommend a book to you, and it's nothing to do with estate planning. It's a book called Contested Will. It's about a court case that William Shakespeare was involved in. But what I took out of that that's relevant to the discussion we're having, which is really interesting, is that wills in Shakespeare's time were very different from the kind of wills we have. It wasn't just, you know, all to the spouse. You remember, if you know anything about Shakespeare, he gave his second best bed to his wife. There were gifts to friends, there were gifts to causes and so forth. That's a very different approach to your social involvement than what we have. And I think to some extent it's a mind shift. So your charitable giving, so people who have no children they're looking after, are interested in that. People who are super wealthy are interested in that. People who already have a family, but they need to make provision for the eventuality that some disaster happens. And I have been involved in selling estates where the money was all going to charity because there had been a family disaster and there was no family. No immediate family that it was going to, so it was going to the default, which was to charity. That's, I think, an important piece of planning as well. I just want to say a couple of other things. With respect to your decay curve, it's a piece of this that we often forget. When we do wills, we also do powers of attorney. It is extremely important, if you have been a regular donor to charity, that your power of attorney be fairly specific about this. And I say that because the legislation in this area, the Succession Law Reform Act, is not really very clear about when the person who's acting on your behalf can continue your donations. So if that's a matter of importance, make sure that you look at your powers of attorney and that your power of attorney for property allows for that kind of gifting to happen. Second point I want to make, just on a more technical matter, is in your will, if you have charitable gifts, there should be 3 clauses. There really should be. One should be one that allows your executors to accept the receipt of an authorized person of the charity that you're making the donation to. That just makes it so much easier for them to, quite frankly, get off the hook when they've disposed of their obligation to make the gift to the charity. The second is a clause that allows your executors to select an alternate charity in the event that the charity that you have named doesn't exist anymore or has changed its names or its purposes, and that does happen from time to time. And what you don't want again is to have your executors going back to court to try to decide what to do with that money because the church that you named has closed and doesn't exist anymore. The third clause is the clause that says if you're making a gift to charity, you are authorized to make it in the form of a appreciated securities. And that's just kind of a reminder of one of the tax benefits that we've been talking about. But otherwise, if that clause isn't there, the charities could, in theory, demand the money in cash. If the gift is made in appreciated security, it's a big tax benefit to your estate.
I'm really impressed by this group, and I travel all over North America. We have opportunities to speak to groups just like you. This is the first time Shakespeare's ever been brought up.
I had a previous career.
Patrick.
I just wanted to add, when we have an opportunity to, as advisors, to tell stories and to listen to stories based on all the meetings that we've attended. And what would you do today if you knew tomorrow you were going to die? What would you do differently? And if I had a crystal ball and I knew when everybody in this room was going to die, I could go on tour forever. But it's so important to get your financial house in order, to make sure that, what's going to be different. So I have a client who's 92 years old, whose husband died. She's into Tai Chi and everything else. I think she's going to live to 192. Her husband died over 40 years ago. So things were a little rough, and she's been prepared since he died. She's still here. A friend of mine who passed away about 4 weeks ago, from cancer, he was given 4 years from the time he was diagnosed. He got his financial house in order because he knew. We don't know. I'm healthy right now as I sit here, I think. And that's what's important, is when we're sitting with clients and we're talking to donors and we're telling stories, sometimes some of those things trigger, I need to get 1 or 2 of these things done and get them off my plate today. Because what if?
So if I can answer your question, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, I wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't either.
One of the things that you just kind of touched on is the fact that there's some sort of a checklist that you have to go through, right? My mom's a single woman, and I said to her, she said she'd updated her will, and I said, oh, great. Where's your will? She says it's in the safety deposit box. And I said, so where's that? Because she's moved. And so these are things that you go through, and to have a checklist. What is a typical checklist? What should it look like? And I'm just going to throw it out. Jen,
yeah. Start? Yep. Obviously, the first thing that we're going to be asking for is the will, right? But where is it located? Because you want to be able to find the will, obviously, as soon as someone passes away. I advise my clients to have a little black book. And in that book, I'm advising them to have the list of their advisors, including everyone from someone who, obviously, the types of professionals that are at this table, but also perhaps their banker, perhaps someone who's been a confidant with respect to other affairs. Perhaps it's their contact at their charity of choice. That's one of the important things. I also suggest to clients that they have in their black book the details of all of their accounts, all of their insurance products, any detailed financial information that the executors can go to. They can pick up that book and know that they have all the people named there that they can go and start researching. Because just as Mary Alice would have experienced with respect to settling estates, when we're trying to do the tax returns for deceased taxpayers or for their estates, lots of times we'll have finalized tax returns, a couple of years have passed, and the executor will come and say, I don't know what this is. I found this piece of paper when I was going through my aunt's drawers of a dresser that was left to me. It looks like there's some more money, there's some more assets here. So it's just making the process for the executor much simpler if all of that information is somewhere that's easy to access. So maybe I'll just pass it on to them.
We have a checklist that we give to our clients for estate planning, and it has all this information that Jennifer just talked about. But one piece that we also add in there is doctor information. You may say, why? Well, when we're dealing with large insurance cases, we have to get an attending physician's report, and sometimes that's a hang-up because the son or the daughter of the individual that died haven't lived in Kingston or wherever for such a long time. They have no idea where mom and dad went for the doctor. So anything that you can put in, whether it's a black book like this or something that's branded or whatever, these guides are on the internet, they're at the library, lots of advisors have them. Put everything that you can possibly think of that would make things easier, and that could be right beside your bed so that if you're not here tomorrow morning, people could find it very easily. It's not locked away down in the basement or in the attic or something like that.
Sorry, can I just add one more thing? Besides that bit about the piece of paper that's in the aunt's dresser, I'm sure we've all heard stories of this, but it happens a lot. And that is where people put cash in little pockets somewhere in their house. And really, it's important to know where that is. I had a conversation with my own mom not too recently, and she said, don't forget that I have cash where it is. And I would never have thought she'd do that. So I think it's just really important to have that dialogue with, with the executors. I also think that with respect to the checklist, that may not necessarily be on the checklist, it's so important to have the conversation with the executors and with the main beneficiaries of your family. I've seen a lot of situations with clients, unfortunately, where the contents of the will are a surprise, and quite often not a pleasant surprise. But you need to have the executors on board. You need to make sure that the executors want to be the executors of your estate, because that will cause a problem. And also, if you are deciding to provide for provide more to a particular child and not to a different child, that's a problem. So you need to make sure that people are aware of that. So on the checklist, even though it's not a piece of paper that you're going to have or a document, is to have that really straight conversation, clear conversation.
I've got one thing I want to throw out. My wife and I redid our wills last year. Kids became adults, but we've gone through it on a systematic basis. The thing that we looked at this time was something that would reduce our tax, so either for myself or for my wife, to zero. We looked at, on our estate, how can we do that? And we designated our executor in the will to do a calculation for tax zero. So whatever tax would be owed, they would do the calculation to determine how much would have to be donated to reduce the tax number to zero. Now, the way, and this isn't anything against Revenue Canada, because Revenue Canada happens to be your partner in this. They've created the tax regime to really help your organizations in the funding that they require. And all Revenue Canada asks you to do is to make up the difference between the tax that you owe. So the tax credit that they're giving you is their portion of the equation, and then you top it up to realize your tax zero number. And we can actually show you a number of scenarios around that. But let's just say that in the circumstance of a person here who would owe $80,000 in tax.
Can you go to the microphone and just speak to it?
Sure.
People will be able to see the actual figures.
Sorry about that. In a case where a person would owe $80,000 in tax, to reduce that tax number to zero would be somewhere in the vicinity of about $200,000. So what we're really looking at is how do you reduce that $75,000 registered number? So you go to the Quest at the top. Yeah. Yeah. And then you go over to reduce tax to zero on the left-hand side. Yeah. And if you bequeath $200,000, you get an $80,000 tax credit, and the cost of your bequest is $120,000. You would see that the net assets for the estate would be somewhere in the vicinity of $738,000 when you start with $980,000. But the benefit here is what you're trying to do is say that you can leave something for your heirs, you can leave something for society, and assume that if you click over to percentage of market value, and you had 4 children, and you made the 5th child society or charity, so you turned that number into 20%. And then you enter it. So if the individual bequeathed $188,000, they'd get a $75,000 tax credit, and the net cost of their bequest is $112,000. They'd still owe Revenue Canada $5,000. So what we're trying to do is really illustrate for individuals the power that what they can do if they plan things through in terms of their estates. And very simply, and we can actually show if individuals wanted to give now, but the idea of trying to leave net tax zero is the objective that we'd be looking for in some cases. And on the legal side, if we want to paper it, that is a good starting point. But the accountants, your financial advisors, everyone coming together can best advise you in terms of how this can be facilitated. Mary Alice.
Just on the issue of checklists, there's an important area of information that we often forget about, and that's electronic information. A lot of people use email. You do your checklist, put it on your computer, and you forget to tell anybody what the password is to get into your computer. It's not all that helpful. So make sure that on your checklist, and among the things that you consider is passwords for email, if you've got E-Trade accounts, if you've got, a lot of people have access to various, so for example, you buy Canada Savings Bonds online, there's an access code to that. Obviously, this is information you need to keep safe, but make sure that your executor or the person who's going to act as your power of attorney is going to be able to access that information as well.
In the era of Facebook, there's a new app on Facebook. It's called When I Die. And people are now going on there and making their wills. What do you have to say about that?
Have fun. It's a great exercise. It's not going to be probated in Ontario. But, it is a huge issue, though. And I have to tell you, it's hard to provide guidance here because all of these various social networking apps have different rules about how they handle your program on your death. And so you kind of have to go through it individually. But again, my best advice is make sure that whoever's going to be your executor has access to the information that you have in that regard. But now you can't do an electronic will.
But we've got 5 minutes to go, then I'm going to open this up. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, a lot of thoughts, if you've been having a chance to think about things. The question here is around affordability. A lot of people don't give because they don't think they can afford to make the gift now. How can you work with your clients to help them understand the benefits of making a charitable gift today and helping them through their planning process? Jen?
Sure. Well, first of all, if we do the tax estimate of what the consequences will be upon death, for some people, when they look at that huge tax bill and they're looking at affordability and looking at perhaps the cost of annual premiums for an insurance product that will be a beneficiary and therefore a charitable donation tax credit on their final tax return, that makes the whole affordability issue non-existent because they're, at the end of the day, they're going to be in pocket much more, or their estate's going to be in pocket much more. As Mary Alice referred to earlier, nothing's for free, but what we want to do is make sure that there's good value for what we spend. And if we believe in the benefits of the charity that we're supporting, then wouldn't we want to arrange our affairs that we could support our charity to the maximum benefit? And so I think that's the message that I would give to clients about the question around whether something is too expensive, whether making setting up an insurance product, for example, and making those annual insurance premiums, whether that's too costly. And I think the answer is look at the big picture. What happens if you're hit with a Mack truck? How is that going to benefit everyone? The charity's going to benefit, and yes, you know, I think we all have to pay our fair share of income taxes, but if we can instead divert those income taxes to the charity, then I believe that we're better off.
The other thing is every little bit helps, and I've come across lots of clients where they had a small insurance plan and the death benefit might be $5,000 or $7,000 and they don't need it, and they have their estate's worth $500,000 or $2 million or whatever, but that $5,000 can really help out a charity. And the big thing is $1,000 to ALS is huge. $1,000 to the Cancer Society might not seem as big, but it's still $1,000. We can all help, and what happens is a lot of times we give when somebody we know dies. So we go to the funeral home and we leave $25 or $50, and that seems to be the only time we do it. We just donate. We just do it sporadically. And so when we're sitting down and building plans and talking about that again, it's planting the seeds and dripping on people to say, you know what, you can make a difference. Who do you want to help? How do you want to help? Because a lot of times we help out with charities because we've been affected by something or a disease, or one of our family members has. But there's lots of things that we can do and lots of things that can fit into our budgets.
I hardly agree with what both have said so far. And first thing, obviously, you have to find affordability. You can't just say, yes, you're not going to run out of money. You have to use some kind of program to be able to show that. Another one that is fairly obvious, which a lot of people overlook, is they have all sorts of money, but they have a fairly sizable life insurance policy sit over here. Make the beneficiary or make the owner of the charity. It doesn't cost you a cent. Big gift to the charity. So there are different ways to look at it, but it's always key, as Pat said, is normally when a relative or somebody has gone, had cancer or whatever, has gone through the hospital, that's when the charitable donation comes to the forefront. Again, a checklist or whatever will enable you to pinpoint that and expand on it. And a previous question is, should I use that electronic will or not? I hardly agree. What goes into that or comes out of it is basically your knowledge, and I would support a lawyer doing your will every time.
I guess in a sense, turn it around, and instead of saying, how can you afford it, it's like, how can you afford not to? You know, it's a bit like anything else that you put your head in the sand and hope it'll go away. Well, the bad news is, of course, it isn't going to go away. It's like the old saw about death and taxes, the two things you can't avoid. And doing nothing is often significantly more expensive than doing something. It's a bit like not paying your bills. They just accumulate interest and your credit rating goes down and all those, but you know, it's just one of those things. I think that it's an extension of the kind of prudent planning anyone would do. You plan for your death by way of using a will.
Well, I think we've covered off a lot of the topics that we wanted to talk about. Now it's your turn. We'd like to hear from you, the questions that you've got, that you've sort of been able to formulate over this time. And you've got a panel of experts here, many who you know, and they are ready for your questions. Please.
Yes, what about gifting before death? Gifting to your children.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so gifting before death, yeah, so you're asking about the value of making gifts to your children, for example, while you're still alive. It's a great idea, but I'm going to distinguish the difference between gifting, for example, your jewelry, your personal effects. I like to say, yes, absolutely, gift that now for all sorts of reasons. First of all, no tax, no probate, nothing if you make a current gift. Secondly, you know that it gets where it's supposed to go. And I tell you, many of the big fights in estates are over the personal effects. It's not the multi-million-dollar bank account that people fight about. It's the old copper kettle that they fight about. So if you can do some of that gifting, and you get to see the person give it. I mean, that's the fun, that's the joy, is actually seeing them receive it. So that, by all means. Now, if you're talking about gifting your house or your investment account, I'd say, oh, put the brakes on. Let's not go there. That's probably not a good idea.